Tim Query, and I'm the urban forester with the Lexington Fayette Urban County Government. And we are on South Hanover looking at some of the damage that was caused from the ice storm. This is probably one of the hardest hit areas of town. The downtown has some of the most mature trees in Lexington, and so therefore we saw extensive damage.
David Barbary, you're in the crowd. Can we meet without a quorum? All right, let's meet. We need to get this show on the road. Today's March the 17th, and this is the Planning Committee of the Council, and we will go ahead and get started. And I know we have one more council member who is en route, so our first item, I believe, is going to be very brief. It is the electrical inspector fee schedule update, and Mr. Dewey Crow from Building Inspection has a very brief, I understand, comment.
Yes, we have met with Mr. Jones with Commonwealth Inspection Bureau and his attorney, Mr. Vic Roy. They presented some additional information to us, and as a consequence of that, we requested some additional information from them. They're going to provide that shortly, and hopefully we will bring a complete recommendation back to this committee at the next meeting.
Okay, in April.
In April, yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. The next item on our agenda, there are two items which Councilmember Henson put into committee. Number 2, time limits on building permits, and number 3, increased fines on zoning/building permit violations. And Councilmember Henson, where are you? She's not here, but she knows how to bring the state people in. Because among us, and I presume that he will want to make comments eventually, is Commissioner Richard Maloney from the State Department of Housing, Building, and Construction. Is that right? So shall we, and I know you have to get out of here pretty quickly. We have a legal, can we take just a minute to hear from David Barbary on the legal memo that's in the packet, and then we'll hear from our state commissioner. Welcome.
Welcome.
Do you have any comments on the memo?
Comment? Does something need to be explained on it? I tried to be concise.
I just wondered if you were very concise. Thank you very much. And
I think this is a very confusing area because people get hung up on what you can and can't do with various things. I was just talking to Councilmember Lawless about doing some things that are going to come to you all at a future point in time as a council with respect to having. They're not technically, they are technically additional penalties, but they're provided for in the building code where if someone does not have the appropriate permit, they would be subject to essentially a double fine or a $500 minimum fine. So that's something you can do in the building code that's allowable, and that's something that's actually going to come to you all as a proposal at a future point in time. But the gist of the legal opinion was your options are limited because of the comprehensive scope of both the building code and the zoning code with respect to things that are already covered in those two areas with respect to what you all would be able to do in addition to that as a local form of regulation. So.
The two questions you answered just for the public were, can the LFUCG place a time limit on the completion of a permitted project, and can the LFUCG adopt increased fines or penalties for zoning or building permit violations? Councilmember Henson, these are two of the 3 issues you had put in committee, and I said, you sure know how to get the big state people here. So is there any question from David before we hear from Commissioner Maloney? No? All right. Richard Maloney, welcome.
Thank you. And I just want to commend you guys for all the hard work you all have done for the last year and a half, and sure miss you. But I do have a lot of questions been asked about what we can do, what we can't do, and the state's here to work with you guys. And one thing is on the fines on permits. You can do fine if they have a permit and it's not done right. You can fine it. What it is, or if they build a building and didn't have a permit, you can fine them. And how it works is you will fine them what their permit was, and you can double it. So if they go out and build a garage and didn't have a permit, they have to pay for the permit fee, and whatever that fee will be doubled. That's what the state will allow you all to do. And the other issue is on how long a building can be on expiration. As you know, we've got 180 days to what a permit's good for, and if they do not do anything, then you all would take the nuisance law, come in, and then you would. But if they are doing some kind of work, and that's something that the building code will be able to document to prove that that has been done, then you can extend that to another 180 days. But some of the issues coming up, what is considered work and what is not considered work, and what I've asked you guys, if you want to, is get you a committee put together. I know Kevin Fiddle loves committees, and I think he would be excellent in having this, chair this committee. What I would propose is that you all come up with what you consider is work and what you consider not work. And when you all put that together, please bring it down to the state, and I will take it to my board, and we will review it. And if it ends up being something we can do, then we'll take it on over to LRC, adopt that as a code, and that will be put in our code. And I know in other cities have the same problem. I think Orangeburg or Bowling Green, one of those cities, are working on that. So this is a good opportunity that y'all can bring those two together and come up with some proposal, because I'm like you put a nail in and then put another permit on. Why don't you put 2 nails in or something? It's real vague. So I asked if you could come up with some idea what is work and what is not work, then we'll be glad to help you on that.
So you're suggesting if we had a subcommittee that would work maybe with law and building inspection to put that together, we could then bring it to you?
Then bring it to us, and I'll be glad to present it to the board, and then if it passes, then it will then go to LRC, and then they will vote on it, and it would be put into a code if it passes.
Because I know one of the worst offenders in the 4th District would get to the end of the permit period, go out and hammer a few times, and then go back and get the permit. And this has gone on for years.
That's something that you all could try to
Okay.
sit in, what you consider work and what, and that, but I would recommend that you do put some builders on there, because my board has a lot of builders, that you want to be sure that builders get on the same support.
Good idea. I think there are a few questions for you. Councilmember Lawless.
Thank you so much, Commissioner, for gracing us with your presence today. I've been chasing this fines for building without a permit for a year, as you know, because we've had many conversations about it. And I had asked for a draft ordinance, and we went back and forth. And George Mann,
George.
Yeah. Sent an email saying that since KBC and KRC, the commercial and residential codes aren't consistent on the minimum fine of $500. It's not listed in the commercial, but it is in the residential.
Right.
And that you all were looking at changing that, and it had to be reviewed. It looks like it was withdrawn in 9908 and was refiled. And Mr. Mann said on March 3rd that it had not changed, but it had to be reviewed by LRC, and he was going to include that in the package of code changes going to LRC within the next week, which would have been.
That is correct.
So do you know where that is? Because if it's about to change, we would want our ordinance to be in alignment with whatever changes are made.
No, we'll take it to LRC next week. I think they meet next week. And once that changes, we will inform everybody across the state that this
Okay,
change,
so-
that we're going to.
Because we have a draft of an ordinance ready to go that would be in alignment with those changes.
Yeah, we would be
So
glad
as soon
to
as
get that for you.
as soon as you do that, we can pull the trigger on our ordinance.
The one thing I did want to say, what you were talking about on permits, folks that don't get permits.
Right.
We are really going out and enforcing that across the state because of the industry, as you know, right now, it's the down business, it's downtime, but you got a lot of people that are beating the system, and you got a lot of people that are doing it right. And that's why we encourage everyone in every party to go out and get the folks that are going out there and getting illegal buildings up there without permits, And that's why we ask
Yep.
that you do go after and find them and everything. So we have stepped ours up, and we are finding, and we're finding a lot of that across the state.
Right.
Because of what the economy is.
And the other issue along here is demolition without a permit, but that's not out of your section, so we need to pursue that at some point. I know our planning calendar's full, but I'm also very interested in looking at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is this ordinance, draft ordinance, something that you have, David? I hadn't heard about that until just now, and it's not in our packet. So can you get us that, or is it something you're working on?
We had been working with building inspection because they had made a mutual request along with the council member
Okay.
for that. And there's a complication simply because there are other things added on that naturally need to take place anyway from building inspection. So I think we're going to bifurcate the two issues and
Okay.
present
Yeah,
a
they're-
separate ordinance on, and the assumption that I told Commissioner, or Councilmember Lawless, was that we're going to assume the $500 change is going to take place. So I think what we will send you all is the draft that has the $500 minimum amount in both the residential and the commercial property codes.
And so then, question 2, which Councilmember Henson put into committee, then that could be doubled under the current law. Is that correct?
The existing building code allows you all, as a discretionary measure, to implement double fines, but in some instances, under the residential code in particular right now, it has to be a $500 minimum no matter what. So on the residential end, the minimum fine is going to be, and technically it's an additional building permit or additional penalty for not having pulled the permit. So what would happen is when they are caught not having the permit, they would have to pay the original fee that they did not pay. They would have to pay double that fee if it wasn't $500 more. If it was less than $500, they would have to pay the original fee plus $500.
Okay, to meet the minimum.
Right.
Okay, all right, very good. Did you have anything else? No? Councilmember Gray, Vice Mayor Gray.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is really just a point of information, and I may have missed it. Did Mr. Maloney tell us who he is and where he's from in order to demonstrate credibility? Oh, okay. Well, I'm so sorry. All right. Just wanted to make sure that our viewing audience knew why he's here. Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Councilmember Henson.
Hi, Mr. Maloney. Thank you for coming. I do have one question for you. As it pertains to a building permit, does the state require a permit to put up fencing?
You what now? Put up,
Fencing?
in a single residential, we do not deal with,
And does it depend upon the size, or is it?
commercial, it will depend on size on commercial, but on single residential, no.
Okay, because the reason I put this into committee was actually over a fence that had taken 2 or 3 years to go up, and lots of other complaints too, similar. So in that case, we could impose our own penalties.
That's what I was going to bring up. I talked to Councilmember Lawless, and we discussed that as long as in what is written in your ordinances, as long as it doesn't have anything to do with state, you can put the fines or whatever you want on that.
Okay.
And on
I
single
just want-
residential fencing does not have any, and you all do have a fencing permit. You may want to look and see what is attached, if it is attached to residential.
I think LFUCG building inspection does require a permit for fencing,
Right. And you
but it is not required by the state.
no, not in single residential families.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Lawless.
Along with the fencing, things like decks also are local ordinances rather than state, so we can do whatever we want with that.
Was that, I didn't hear you. Was that a question, or you was answering, Peggy?
Do other council members have questions? Commissioner Maloney suggested we put together a committee, which I think is a really good idea.
And I asked Kevin to chair
and he has asked Kevin to chair it. But it seems to me that this committee could, if someone makes the motion, could establish an ad hoc committee with some council members, building inspection, and some builders to just quickly knock this out rather than going into a full-blown task force. Well, being the chair, I would ask, what was your motion again, Councilmember Blues? Ad hoc?
Without going into a full-blown task force, that we could appoint a committee of council members, builders, participation of building inspection and law to knock this out expeditiously. And I think it's also recommended that Councilmember Stinnett chair this committee. So moved.
We have a motion on the floor, and the point of the committee would be to put together a list of things that constitute real work. And would you want a list of things that don't constitute real work?
I think I'll just go
With
with
what
the
is
real work, and I would also do both, just in case, so we can use that example when you bring it to the board to show these are the kind of things that are going on that they consider it is work that has been allowed to do 180 days. We don't consider this being real work. So I think it'd be a lot easier to show the ones that you all see that are not real work will probably be a better selling point. And I think that would be the way.
Okay. Councilmember Lawless, to the motion.
Can that committee also look at taking the administrative hearing process that we now have in code enforcement, but we don't have in building inspection, to the state at the same time to change that? And I know the group in Bowling Green is interested in doing that. What?
Councilmember Stinnett. This is actually not on the motion, but go ahead.
Currently, we do have a civil penalty process for zoning violations. It goes to any appeals of those are referred to the Infrastructure Hearing Board, and this is within the zoning ordinance, and we do use that for zoning violations. They also, in a zoning issue, also have the ability to appeal to the Board of Adjustment for any zoning. So there's three different avenues that they can go to rectify a zoning violation. They can either correct it and pay any fines, or we can take them to district court as well, or they can appeal the issue to the Board of Adjustment and seek relief through the board.
I was talking about building inspection.
Are you talking about building code issues?
I'm talking about people who, when there are violations that have anything to do with building inspection, your only recourse now is to take them to court.
For building code issues, yes.
And that's what I'm speaking to, is building code issues.
You're exactly correct. For building code issues, it is a district court
right.
criminal
And so to better utilize our resources and have better enforcement, that needs to also go to the Richards folks to be changed. And I know that there are some other cities that are interested in having that change. So I was wondering if we could, since we're putting this committee together, deal with both issues.
Well, this planning hasn't really heard that issue. I mean, it would be up to the group if we want to tag it onto this, but we're talking right now about putting time limits on completion of projects.
Could I say a couple words about that issue? Because there's a different legal issue that applies to that as well, which is why, in my opinion, they haven't done more of it than they're doing. We are not allowed to decriminalize criminal conduct at the state level. And the stuff in the building code, the penalties for it are criminal. And so unless there's a change made to that statute that allows you to do the administrative boards, I don't think you're necessarily going to have the authority to issue administrative fines in lieu of a criminal citation. The reason we have not done more administrative board work in this area is because of that legal prohibition. I think it's in KRS 65.88, whatever the section is that creates the administrative hearing boards. There's a specific legal body of law, as well as it's articulated in the statute, that says you can't, in Fayette County, make something less than a crime when it's a crime everywhere else in the state. And the building code violations are crime. If you violate the building code, it is a crime. And that's the real legal issue with respect to that.
I'll withdraw my request and continue my research on this.
Okay, because I think it is an important issue, really important. Is there any other council member comment on the motion? Any discussion?
Chair.
Mr. Ellinger.
Thank you. I have just a question. I understand the reason why you want to do it and try to get it moved through. As my understanding is, we only really have two options. We can either do a task force or do a subcommittee, and I might ask our parliamentarian on that. So I'm trying to figure out. Well, I don't know. Can we do ad hoc, and how's that work?
We've had ad hocs galore in the past.
So that's not an issue. How does that work on a?
The chair can appoint an ad hoc.
So there's not a. Okay, good. I like to hear that. Thank you.
I think it could go quicker.
I agree with that. I was
Reason.
asking some questions. I want to make sure that we can do that, and I'm glad that we can. Thank you.
Okay, good. Would you like to serve if the motion passes? I would. Let's see if the motion passes, and then we'll get some folks on it. Any other comments or questions? If not, all those in favor of the motion on the floor, please say aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, that motion passes. Richard Maloney, it's great to see you. Thank you very much. You'll be hearing from the council. Thank you. I would just say at this point, I'm going to need a couple of volunteers to serve on this ad hoc. I've got Councilmember Ellinger and Councilmember Lawless. And do I have one more? Councilmember Feigl? Thank you very much. You're declining. So we have. This is the defining work. What constitutes work? Yes. But what's your question? Oh, you didn't volunteer for the task force. I mean the ad hoc. Are you withdrawing your volunteerism? So we have Councilmember Ellinger, Councilmember Feigl, and Councilmember Henson. Very good. So the three council members, and we'll ask Mr. Crow, Dewey, would you be willing to work with this group? And then we'll need someone from law. Would that be David Barbary, please? And then I'll work with Paul to get a couple of builders represented on this ad hoc, and we'll get rolling. How's that sound? Okay. Very good. Thank you so much. And our next issue was put into committee by Councilmember James, the Heritage Tree Program, and I'll just give that to you for a minute to get us started.
Thank you, and it will be extremely short because the tree board met last week, and we had a chance to talk a bit, and we've opted to not go the route of ordinance, and instead we are going to go just towards some type of either a resolution or just a recognition for the heritage trees for right now. So you can hold on to this ordinance if you want to. It may be forthcoming down the road, but I would just if I need to make the motion to withdraw it from the planning committee at this time.
Okay, there's a motion to withdraw. Did I hear a second from Councilmember Ellinger to withdraw the Heritage Tree Program? Any discussion?
Is there obviously you've got some reason to not go the ordinance route.
We just felt that we wanted to start off a bit more mild than an ordinance, and just a recognition program to see how it goes, and to see how the process will work, and to graduate to a level of an ordinance, possibly or possibly not, just to see if the recognition or resolution gets the results that the tree board is searching for in honoring the heritage trees in Lexington.
I'm sorry. Without an ordinance, though, you wouldn't be able to protect a particular heritage tree generation to generation, I gather. Or is that possible?
No, you're absolutely right. You can't do protection of something without an ordinance. So it would be pretty much optional through a recognition or resolution program.
Well, I would, I hope that this works. But reading the ordinance, I thought it looked like a pretty effective and, comprehensive sort of step to protect important trees.
It is extremely comprehensive and a very good way to protect, and I'm hoping the tree board will eventually get there, and I hope that you will see this ordinance forthcoming, asking for your consideration at a later point. I think we just feel like we need to start on a less, I don't know what the right word is, abrasive or aggressive in the beginning until we get the program established, up and running, get kind of who's going to do what, and then be able to have a more, I'm having a really hard time with my adjectives today. I needed the source.
Well, if Mark Twain said, if the adjective is in doubt, leave it out.
Hey, yeah, Mark Twain may be my reference a lot today. I hope we'll see it again. I do hope. I mean, I do support the ordinance, and will continue to support the ordinance, but I am guided by my board at this time, and I do think that more conversation needs to happen on our board, and we need to have as much support for an ordinance of all the tree huggers in the world, or at least that meet in the 5th floor conference room before we do something like this. So hold on to it. It will be forthcoming. Thanks.
I think what you're suggesting is like we've done with Herbie, with Rosie, in terms of we don't mandate recycling to the public. We've taken a softer stand to try to pull people on board with recycling rather than saying every one of you has to recycle. And I like this approach, kind of a softer approach. And I know that in Austin there are some huge heritage trees that are plaqued. They have a recognition plaque, and I'm not, I think once we have a few of those go up, it will send a message to other people who may want to do that.
Well, it's interesting you brought up Austin, because that is one of the cities we visited before as a group, and also they do phenomenal things with their trees there. They have a street tree maintenance program that probably takes care of their heritage trees as well. We don't have a very fully funded urban forestry. Our urban forestry is within streets and roads, and a lot of times they're sharing resources, and we just haven't highlighted our urban forestry program and our tree program the way that we really need to in order to be able to support a program like this. Because if you are going to designate a tree and protect a tree, it's going to come down to who's going to have to pay for that. forever, and the maintenance and the pruning and all of that has to happen. So we've got a lot to work on. Last week I mentioned to you all, you should come to that tree board meeting because there are some really exciting things forthcoming with the stormwater fee and things like that, or with the stormwater issues. Trees can play a very vital role, and our urban forestry could help to strengthen a lot of the things that we're doing, but right now it doesn't have the funding that it really needs to do this. So you may see a lot of things like this coming that are more cutbacks in those areas, and so maybe I would ask that this committee, as well as just as a council as a whole, that we look at our priorities and where will we end up having to pay more money later if we don't do some things in advance. So that was kind of a plug for trees, but that is a bigger picture to why a resolution will be presented rather than this ordinance.
So the motion on the floor is to remove the Heritage Tree Program issue from this committee. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye. Anyone opposed? All right, that motion passes. Our next issue in committee is the courthouse area design review recommendations. Wish you could have a shorter name. But we have Billy Van Pelt here, and you are the design review officer, and we have Mike Moiser, and you're the chair. You're still the chair of the board, so welcome. And I know there are a couple of recommendations, and Councilmember Lawless is the shepherd for this issue, right? So do you have any comment before they get going?
No, I just want to thank them for all their hard work, and Mr. Moiser for all his chairing of so many things. But I fully support these changes.
So welcome. Did you want to speak? You're a tag team today.
I'll just be extremely brief and say that these are two recommendations that the Courthouse Area Design Review Board is considering so far. They're evaluating other recommendations on potential ordinance changes in the future, but these are the two that have been voted to forward to your committee so far.
And the two being, number one, no demolition allowed until all administrative appeals are complete.
That's correct.
And number two, require roof inspections by the Division of Code Enforcement and the Division of Fire.
That's
Mike,
right.
Did you have some comments, Mike, at all before we take questions?
I would just say that I think the process of going through the Centerpoint project enlightened us on some things that probably needed to be changed. The first one's just a matter of fairness and due process. But the second is we've recognized that when problems develop with the buildings in our area, they usually start with the roof, and it doesn't make much sense if our staff can't get in there and look at it. So I think these are fairly simple and common sense measures.
Okay. Can you, before we have questions, the email says that your board referred these two changes to the ordinance at your last public hearing. Can you remind us when that was?
Last week. It was last week. Last week,
so it was March of '09. And the no demolition allowed until all administrative appeals are complete, does that have to do with the section 27-6C, which is, it's the authorization permits for demolition?
That's correct. And as the ordinance is now written, there's an administrative appeal to the Planning Commission. And that's the appeal we're talking about having been exhausted before the permits are issued.
Okay. And roof inspections are, can you flesh that out a little of what and where?
Well, presently the staff cannot inspect a roof of one of these buildings unless they happen to be on an adjacent building and look down at the roof. So the proposed change is really to allow the divisions that are charged with enforcement of the building maintenance code and fire protection to be able to get into the building and onto the roof.
Okay, and that would be for any building in the boundary within
Yes.
the courthouse area? Okay. We have lots of questions. So, Councilmember James.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you elaborate a little bit more about what you just said about getting into, this would require the inspector to get into the facility, the building, to check out the roof?
Well, I think it's going to depend on the building. Some of these buildings, you can access the roof from an external ladder or staircase, but in many cases, on the older buildings, the only way you can get to the roof is through some sort of a hatch that goes up through the building.
Okay. So similar to a residential code enforcement inspection, you have to be granted permission.
That's correct.
Somebody has to open the door and let you go in. Will the language in here be such that nothing can go forward unless someone opens the door and says you're allowed to go in? I'm trying to figure out where the teeth in it exist.
Well, I think our thought as a board was that these divisions should have the right to go into the building to get onto the roof. So if that's the only way to get to the roof, then obviously we think they ought to have the right to enter the building and get there.
So if there's a right to get into the building, is there a right for a person to refuse entry into the building?
Presently there is, but we're suggesting that that be changed.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Councilmember Beard.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a little hung up on this requirement of roof inspection. At what point is that triggered? I mean, if you suspect that a roof might be bad, do you trigger this activity, or is this when they come before you and ask to do something that is triggered?
That's a very good question. Currently in the ordinance, inspections are required annually by code enforcement and fire anyway of the buildings within the overlay. There are 90 parcels in the design overlay zone. And since becoming design review officer, I've asked the Division of Code Enforcement and Fire to inspect all those properties, and code enforcement and fire have issued notices to anyone that needs to make a change and given them a time period to make that change, and they've gone back and re-inspected. So the thought of the board was, if we're inspecting the exterior of the building and interior of the building and we're not inspecting the roof, then it's really not a full-blown inspection. Mm-hmm. And the thought is, if everything to the eye on the exterior and interior of the building is okay, but your roof is faulty, then the rest of the inspection is sort of moot.
Okay, that's what I need to know. Thank you.
Councilmember Blues.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me ask a question about the first proposed change. Would this cover, and I gather it wouldn't, court appeals? In other words, if you, and I'm not sure whether, whether that's permitted. In other words, the appeal goes to the Planning Commission. Could it also go to, to a court? And
wait, I see what you're asking. That this ordinance change would make sure that it goes through all the appropriate LFUCG appeals, but would not apply to appeals in the courts.
And then why not?
As it stands now, any action that would be brought in circuit court to challenge a decision of the government, of the local government, you could apply to that court for a stay of the effect of that decision while the appeal is pending, but that's in the discretion of the trial court where you would bring that action. So we haven't moved into that at all.
So this would protect the buildings up to the point of a court appeal, if that were
that's correct.
Occur. Okay, thank you. And with reference to the second request, I think that Councilmember Beard has pretty much answered that that question. And I gather the intent here is to prevent, guard against demolition by neglect.
Yes, I mean, the roof, obviously, of these buildings is the most sensitive portion of the exterior structure. Many of them are multi-story. You can't see the roof from the ground. And so we obviously want to try to protect those.
And I gather then that in some cases you can't see the damage by an interior inspection. I mean, that there might be deterioration that can't be seen from inside.
Yes, that's often the case because the way that a lot of these older roofs are built, the water will transverse to a wall, for example, and go down, and you won't necessarily see the damage in the roof itself.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councilmember Lawless.
I may be wrong on this, but it's my understanding that depending on what's in the building and the size of the building, it doesn't always fall under the Division of Code Enforcement, but sometimes building inspection. Should we include that when it's appropriate?
That would be up to you.
I mean,
The way the ordinance is written, it falls to code enforcement and fire. Our building inspection director is not here. We could certainly investigate that and clarify that for you, and I could report back to the chair.
That's a great idea. Would that
I just
work?
want to make it as inclusive as possible while we're doing it. Thank you.
Will that be satisfactory? Okay. So you'll clarify
Yes,
that?
I will clarify that and
Great.
report to you.
Okay, great. Councilmember Feigl.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a question. You had mentioned earlier that sometimes if you do an interior inspection, it doesn't necessarily tell you what's on the roof, and yet you're asking for for a law that says that it's okay for you to go inspect the roof. So if they let you in to do the interior inspection, are you being denied the right to go up on the roof?
Well, I'm not doing these inspections, but code enforcement and fire are only going to inspect under the letter of the ordinance. So they would be conducting the inspection based on the current ordinance, and they wouldn't ask to go up on the roof unless it was required by the current ordinance.
I think another point that we may have confused you about is depending on the zoning and the use of these buildings, I believe some of these buildings, fire, code enforcement, any of the regulatory agencies can already go inside those buildings and conduct inspections. But within this overlay, not all the buildings are zoned the same, not all are used the same. And what we're asking is that the inspection that's required under our ordinance allow the roofs to be inspected. I dare say there's probably 70 or 80% of the buildings in this zone, they can already go into the inside because they're commercial or office buildings.
Okay, and so you're saying that they don't do the roof inspection just because it isn't required?
That's right.
Okay. And you're looking to have the Division of Code Enforcement and the fire department?
Yes,
Both?
because presently that's what our ordinance, those are the two agencies that are charged to do the inspection under this ordinance.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there other questions from council members? Oh, Councilmember James.
Thank you. I just wonder, what's the penalty now if a person does not comply with this inspection, this annual inspection that happens now? If you're not able to do an annual inspection of one of the buildings within this area, what happens to that building?
I haven't faced that issue. I mean, either one of these agencies they've had to go back multiple times, in some cases to reach the owner, but in every case we have at some point gotten into the building.
Do you know if that's laid out in the ordinance, that if you're not able to inspect a building for whatever reason, then this is something happens?
Well, once again, we haven't faced that issue, but I could certainly do some research on it and get back to you.
Yeah, I'm not really asking if you faced it. I just wondered if the ordinance addresses
There probably is, but I can't tell you off the top of my head. I'll have to do some research and get back to you.
Okay. And what we have in our packet looks like
The existing ordinance.
is this just the, okay, where in here, do you know what section talks about the inspection?
Bear with me just a second.
Sure.
That is 27-8. Page 14, last paragraph, right column.
$27.8, compliance with other codes?
Yes.
Is that what you're looking at? Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. It seems to me that, well, we need to get a sense of what the committee, whether the committee's supportive of these, and if so, I think, it's my understanding, I think we would need to initiate a zoning ordinance text amendment. Is that your understanding? You're both shaking your heads, yes. So, and I'm thinking that if that's the will of the committee, we could do that and still get the information back that Councilmember Lawless has requested.
Yeah, I would like to move this on through, and we can add another text
Is
amendment.
that a motion?
I move that we add this as a text amendment.
Well,
or
that we
recommend, yeah.
That you're moving that we initiate a zoning ordinance text amendment
Yes, ma'am.
to
What you said.
to include these two recommendations.
I do.
Do I hear a second? Okay. Councilmember Blues seconded. Now, questions?
Yeah, when you
Councilmember
had
Clark.
your public hearing, was anyone there to oppose this?
No.
And you've spoken with the building code inspector and the fire department? I guess it's a fire department.
We have, and when we did all of the annual inspections, this has been something that was included in the council's annual report that this board gives, and it was given in December of '08, a list of potential changes as part of the annual update. And so we've gone through this laundry list of potential changes, and thus far, these are the two that's made it through the board approval process and now to your committee. Code enforcement and fire are both aware of these issues, and the director of the Division of Building Inspection certainly is as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And so then during that hearing process, were the property owners within the boundary notified that these issues were on your agenda?
We have to have an ad in the Herald Leader in advance of any hearing that we have, and that is at least 14 days in advance of, or at least 7 days, but not more than 21 days in advance of the public hearing, and these items were listed.
And I know the council received the whole list, as you said, in December, was it?
It was.
Councilmember James.
Thank you. I'm sorry to belabor this point, and maybe it's answered in 27.7 somehow, but I'm really looking for the teeth in this, and because I do think that roof inspections are very important, and I think these are two really good recommendations, but maybe the demolition is something that can be dealt with, but I'm just trying to figure out if you're not able somehow to do the roof inspection, and that's a requirement, we've got a compliance, but what's the penalty? What's the next step if you're not able to do it? Because I could just see, a roof is an expensive thing to repair, and if someone has a building where the roof is faulty, and is then causing some problems, I could see where someone would say, I don't want you to look at the, or try to make it to where you're not looking at the roof.
I think you could amend your motion just to state that whatever the text amendment reads needs to include some kind of, penalty for the roof. I mean, we can do that. Now's the time to do that if that's your desire.
I just wanted to make sure it wasn't already in here. I don't, and I haven't read it thoroughly enough to know, but I thought maybe you would know. That's why I'm asking you.
It's not in here. That's why we're making the recommendation.
Okay, but you didn't make a recommendation for the penalty. Right.
And it may be, I'm not sure about this, but it may be that there is already something somewhere else in the building code or the zoning ordinance that deals with someone who fails to admit an official that is required or permitted under law to do an inspection. We don't have that answer for you, but it's possible there is already something in another ordinance that imposes a penalty generally for your failure to cooperate with an inspecting official.
Well, and that's where I'm going, is on the residential level, there's not. So it's up to a person to open the door to get where this is what we deal with in neighborhoods every day. So that's why I'm trying to let you know is we can have a wish list of things that we hope that people will comply with. But in the end, what are we really trying to get to? And can we make sure that something, first of all, we have to make sure it's legal to impose a penalty on someone not letting you in on, I guess you're talking about private properties.
Yeah, these are all.
They're all private?
There's a few public buildings,
Okay.
but mostly private.
So I think we do need to where, I think, if we can do the ZOTA, that's great. But if we don't have a penalty for compliance or lack of compliance, that's something we need to talk about as well. So I would ask for the law department to really look deeply at that. It's almost a moot point if we don't have any teeth in it.
Well, your suggestion to include that in the motion would work.
We would agree with that.
I mean, the process on this motion, if the committee passes it and it goes to council and passes it, then it goes to planning, and the planning commission would hear it and make a decision up or down. And then we would get the little packet just like we do with every zone change. So initiating the ZOTA, and Barb Rackers can tell me if I'm wrong. Am I right or wrong? I mean, would you mind commenting on that, since this is the motion?
The text amendment would be requested by you. It would go to the Planning Commission for initiation, and then the Planning Commission would act on it, and then it would come back to the council, yes.
Yes, okay. So we could include that amendment, correct, in this motion, if the council so
I'm not sure if that would be
desire.
something that would be enforceable in the zoning ordinance. I don't know. We would have to check into that. We've talked about penalties for other things, and I'm not sure if that's something that would be in the zoning ordinance or if that would be in the code of ordinances or whatever, but we'll find out.
But it could be requested in the motion.
Sure.
Yeah, I would, if in fact this group wants to to support this motion, I'd hate to see it go another month just to get that piece of information when we maybe could include it in the motion, is my thinking.
Can that be accepted as an amendment?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
So the amended motion would, well, okay, so you're amending your motion to say that we request a ZOTA, zoning ordinance text amendment, to include these two recommendations as well as an enforcement clause. Is that your motion?
A fine or penalty.
For enforcement?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Did the seconder...
For not cooperating or allowing the inspection?
Does the seconder accept that? Because if you do, then that... Do we need to vote on that? Kevin's not here.
Could you repeat that, please?
It's a front, yes.
Yes. That an enforcement clause be added to the text amendment.
And your seconder has accepted that?
Yes.
So, Councilmember Beard, and then I notice our chief attorney has come up here. Did you have a comment? Oh, okay, you did not. All right, so sorry. Councilmember Beard.
I'm curious about something else. Are there other similar types of restrictions on other historical properties that are not in the courthouse overlay? And what do you do about that? Or does that need to be addressed?
To
also
some
by us?
degree, the provisions of the historic district with design review guidelines and so forth are similar to this courthouse area, but those zoning restrictions only deal with the exterior of the buildings. Mm-hmm. And so typically this isn't an issue with any of that.
The roof is not considered an exterior?
Well, I mean, the roof certainly is, and code enforcement would be charged with making sure that a homeowner maintains their roof properly, but it's not the Division of Historic Preservation's job to enforce those maintenance regulations. That's
what if it's another type building in the downtown area but not in the overlay?
That would fall to code enforcement only. And they do, we've been dealing with this issue in some other groups that I'm serving on, but they do try to do what they call sweeps of certain areas in the town to look at those building maintenance issues on the outside of buildings. But with their present staffing and funding, it's our understanding they can really only do those every 4 to 5 years and only in certain areas.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Feigl?
Yeah, I just have a question about what the enforcement clause means. What specifically is it?
What I was suggesting was something that gave either that you incur a fine, that you're not able to move forward with some type of permitting process, something that gives, something that stops someone, if there is a building that has a faulty roof and that roof is leading to the degradation or whatever that word is of that particular building, we've got to be able to put something in place that has, where that owner of that building has to do something to that that's causing the most harm.
Okay, I understand what your objective is, what you're trying to do. What I'm suggesting is that if we're going to actually vote on this today, that we need more specifics to go. I mean, if it's a fine, we need to know, what kind of fine are we talking about?
Well, can I take a stab at that? And Barb, I'm going to look at you because you're in planning. I think that to initiate the text amendment to include this would then go to the Planning Commission, and they will see whether they can legally or not legally do it, number one.
You will check into that before.
Yes.
Right.
Because they may not be able to include it in this ZOTA. And number two, then when it comes back to the council, it would include or not include whatever it is we can do, if that makes sense.
Okay.
I mean, that may not satisfy your concern, but I think there's going to be a lot of vetting along the way.
There will be. I mean, we discuss it at staff level
Yes.
and take it to the Planning Commission subcommittees and take it to the Planning Commission, and we'll find out if that is able to be done that way.
And then it will come back to the council again for a vote, up or down, or to put it in committee to discuss or whatever. Is that your sense of what might happen here?
Okay, so then the original motion is to send this to the Planning Commission?
Is to initiate a text amendment.
Okay.
And then it'll
Send a
start.
request to the Planning Commission to initiate
Yes, to
this text
initiate a
amendment.
text amendment, and then the process will kind of kick in, and the way it does with every request. And there was one recently where they rejected it. I don't remember what it was. Do you remember what it was, where we asked them to initiate a text amendment and they chose not to?
I'd have to
It's
look back
blocked out.
Yeah, me
I've
too.
blocked it out too. But anyway, it could come back in any number of ways.
Yeah, and there have been times when there has been a text amendment it's gone through the Planning Commission, and then it gets to the council level, and it has gone to a subcommittee to discuss, and then never come back.
In fact, we had one put in just last Tuesday. Okay, now, did that?
That
does
answers my questions.
Okay,
Thank you.
satisfy the question. Councilmember Beard.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. Billy?
And this is on the motion.
Well, it's on the question of the fines.
Okay.
Do you have any notion or idea about how, a $25 fine or even a $250 fine is not going to necessarily force somebody to put a $50,000 roof on their building?
I think Councilmember Gorton said it best when she said there would be a lot of vetting of what this looks like. So I think at some point after this goes to the Planning Commission and they make a decision whether or not this is something that can move forward, there's going to be a draft ordinance. And at that point in time, then you will be able to discuss what that ordinance looks like and what the fine looks like and how much the fine is. That's not something that we would get involved in. And I think that code enforcement would also be at the table when that ordinance is being drafted to see how it's handled in other areas that are outside of the overlay.
I understand how it would work. I was just trying to pull on your all's experience as to, I can remember, for instance, the situation with the old Ben Snyder building. That roof was very faulty, and it had water that drained all the way through it to the basement, as I remember. But if there isn't enough teeth in it, do you have any, Mike, do you have any idea of what's done elsewhere or what the scope of what's done elsewhere as far as fines are concerned?
I do know that the Division of Code Enforcement has the right to impose administrative penalties and fines for failure to comply with the building maintenance code. And they have done that with some downtown buildings to the tune of thousands of dollars, either resulting in the owner eventually paying those fines and complying or getting the work done. So I didn't want to confuse the point that Councilmember James was making about enforcement. There are already civil penalties that the Division of Code Enforcement can impose if someone doesn't repair their roof once that's discovered. I think the issue that isn't addressed at this point and we don't know the answer to is how do we penalize someone who doesn't let them in the door to find out that that problem exists.
Because I would guess that if it got along that far, it's too late at that point if the roof has been penetrated.
Well, and that's why the yearly inspection requirement in this ordinance is such a good thing, because if we really do that every year, we're liable to catch these problems before they become real.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor Gray.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I've listened attentively and with great interest to this conversation. And sometimes I think we, with good intentions, we maybe miss the context or the 30,000 foot or the 50-year implications of what we're talking about or trying to do here. My view of it is, and that's, I mean, all the conversation that we're having is really important. But I think the context of this is a matter of public policy. This area has been determined to have been fragile, before being fragile, important, significant, a touchstone. It represents history. It represents what many people's imagination is of a downtown, of a city. Not necessarily big buildings like on Madison Avenue, but buildings that are to scale and have a pedestrian friendliness to them, an approachableness to them. At least they have what's left of them. So, and what we're talking about here is, yes, putting some teeth behind a public policy strategy that was created several years ago when the Ben Snyder buildings, for example, were demolished after years of neglect Many would argue intentional and deliberate neglect. But what we're talking about, at least in my view, are penalties that are more like a toy hammer than a sledgehammer. So my concern, I have less concern, both as a property owner in the downtown, as a citizen, and as an elected official. I have less concern about the egregiousness or the level of the penalty that we may be suggesting here than I do about the 50-year, 100-year, 300-year consequences of erosion of a fabric that has significant economic and brand value to a city. Okay, so that's just to say, while these are significant questions and important ones, at least in my view, and I may be wrong about this, but the way I'm translating it is that these penalties that we're discussing are really, in the big scheme of things, pretty modest, right? I mean, we haven't set numbers to them, right? But the ones that you described in other conditions that we do set numbers to, what are they?
Well, I know of one case where the fines got, I think, up to about $28,000 on a single building.
Over how many years?
Over years.
Right.
Many years.
Right. So as a matter, I mean, I think what we're saying is, as a matter of public policy, we either say that this is an important area, place, and therefore we should initiate legislation to protect, preserve, enhance it, or we don't, right?
I agree with that, and I think from our board's perspective, we know that when people come before us and ask to demolish one of these buildings, the argument usually is, I can't do anything with the building, it's too far gone.
Yes.
And if we're not proactive in catching these problems early, then we've created that argument.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Councilmember Lawless.
For code enforcement, something like abating trash, the fines can be paid and paid, but if they cite a property for, say, a structural problem with the roof, it's not just a fine. They can put a lien on the property if the problem is not fixed.
They can also condemn the property and prohibit human occupancy, which is a pretty
So there are pretty big teeth with those kinds of problems rather than, nuisance problems.
Is there any other comment on the motion? If not, we'll go ahead and take the vote. The motion on the floor is to request the Planning Commission to initiate a zoning ordinance text amendment to include these two recommendations brought forward, and to include enforcement clauses and fines. And we'll find out along the way if that can be done. So all those in favor say aye. Anyone opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mike and Billy and Barb. Really appreciate it. And that will be read out at next week's work session and then go on the docket for vote. So it's going to take a little while here. The final item is, if you will turn to the back of your packet, issues in committee. And council members, I wanted to first of all go straight to the second page of issues, and I would like to entertain a motion to remove the private detention and retention basins, since that's already been moved forward to the council and we've voted on that. So do I hear a motion to remove it from our list? Do I hear a second? Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. None are opposed. And then Councilmember James, I guess we'll wait until the heritage tree issue gets reported out next week, and the council, which did put it into committee, votes to take it out. So we'll wait on that one. Now, if we can go back to the beginning of this list, there is a lot, isn't there? It's all very interesting. There were, let me get, excuse me 1 minute, I've got another list. Paul Schoniger and I get together a time or two each month and look at the issues in committee and see what can be heard. It's my understanding that the student housing, and I should have asked this while Mike Moiser was here since he chairs the Student Housing Task Force. It's my understanding that that issue, which is 2, 4, 6, 7 from the top, will probably be ready in April. We hope. The electrical inspector fee will come back to us. That's midway down. And we've now formed we're going to form an ad hoc to look at Councilmember Henson's issues, the 2 issues. So those won't come back to us for a little while. It's my understanding the Newtown Pike design ordinance toward the bottom of the first page will be ready in April. And so are there any issues on here that council members have questions about? Yes, Councilmember James.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was going to ask Vice Mayor when he thought we could bring something about infill and redevelopment. We heard at the retreat, some folks just don't know about the 160 recommendations. And I wondered, how can we bring those to this group or to the full council so that folks are aware of the progress so far?
That's a good question. I think maybe we ought to just get an update on it and what we're doing. What do you think about that? Will that work? That next planning,
in April.
Can we?
It is in committee, and we do need to have, if you think an update can we get an update ready?
Yeah.
Yeah, it might even take care of some of these other issues that are in the committee.
Right.
Some of them overlap.
Okay, let's work
now
on we'll work on that.
If the
compare where there may be some matching of issues, right?
Mm-hmm.
If the student housing issue is ready for April, it will require a fair amount of discussion time, I believe. But we could at least look at a progress report from infill and redevelopment.
Yeah.
Would that work?
Yep.
Okay. Yes. Councilmember Lawless? Are you on your microphone?
Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Since the Blue Horse may not take much discussion, could we put that in with the student housing or put it on the docket for April?
We have Newtown Pike design ordinance for April. We have progress report from infill and redevelopment, which you just council committee requested, and student housing issues.
I was thinking about maybe
hefty.
in that special meeting.
Oh, special meeting,
Yeah.
yes. I
Since
hadn't
it would
gotten to that
be-
yet.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, this is for the regular planning committee, so I think we're just about full for April. Are there other questions about issues in committee? And then we're going to talk about when we might have a special meeting to address the Blue Horse and the 2040 vision. And we need to discuss a special meeting for the ZODA, which was put into planning committee last week. So, Councilmember Beard.
I was just curious about why the Blue Horse is in the planning committee.
It's a branding issue for planning for, I'm presuming, I didn't put it in here, but
I put it in planning because it was suggested that it was a branding issue and most appropriately placed in planning, so.
'Cause, I mean, it's happening already.
it's not happening with the city.
It's not happening
I
with the
understand, but
It's only happening with the Convention and Visitors Bureau.
And it would include the Wayfinder signs, hopefully, and so all of that was part of planning. Thank you.
And
the only way
Vice
we're
Mayor
gonna-
Gray had a comment.
But yeah, because unless the council moves on this, administration, the mayor have said that they're not in favor of it. So we've got to either do something or not, and we've got 12 months or 14 months before hundreds of thousands of people are going to be here and trying to point their way around downtown one way or another. Find their way, maybe.
Thank you. Now, are there any other comments or any issues that need to be removed?
I have a comment.
Yes, Councilmember James.
I've heard a rumor that Parks Master Plan will be talked about in May. Is that correct? That is what Director of Parks, no?
In the committee, you mean? I haven't discussed that with him. We have not put it on our May
I
agenda
contacted
yet. But
Jerry to determine who he wanted a contact person. I said it hadn't been put on an agenda yet, but I was just looking for a contact person. If he surmised that meant May, that's a miscommunication between Jerry and I, but
I think it'd be great if we could get to it in May.
Yeah, my only concern or question was through the budgeting process, if there's something that comes forward from Parks that's related to the Parks Master Plan and we haven't adopted it completely, how can we give our vote would be our input, but I didn't want anything to precede a full-fledged discussion about the master plan that would come forward from Parks.
And I understand that. It was put in, the mayor's going to make his budget address in 3 weeks. So if we could have a special meeting to attend to it, that would be really the only way it could get, because he's having his hearings right now.
I mean, if there's I'm a bit concerned, not concerned, but I'd like to be able to kind of sort it out. And we've got constituents that are reading it, residents that are reading it, and I know that they feel like they need a venue. Have other people had the same input from their residents? I don't know, maybe it was just me, but.
Let's look at, it's possible we could have the Parks Master Plan, the Blue Horse, and Destination 2040 all in a special park planning meeting. I think that would work if the committee's agreeable.
I would agree to that. Thank you.
All have been real troopers on these special meetings. Are there any other issues you wish to take off of the list before we look at our calendars? Councilmember Beard.
Chairperson, pardon me. The Liberty Road issue, is that done? Or is there something still pending on the Liberty Road?
Paul, do you want to speak to that?
Councilmember Stennett or someone from engineering can probably better address that, but they're still being delayed by right-of-way acquisition on that project.
Yeah,
At least on parts of, there's 2 parts of Liberty Road, 1A and 1B, and there's still some right-of-way issues on, I think, 1B.
Where it intersects Todd's Road, maybe?
Yes, sir.
Up in that area, okay.
And we have, this group decided we wanted to hear that in a written form, so every other month, so.
One more thing.
Councilmember James.
The land bank, I know when Harold was here last, we talked about that whatever he brought forward, he could take to the full council. I think we talked about that, if I recall correctly. Do you all recall that? It had to do with the establishment of that interlocal body.
Yes, the interlocal agreement with the school system and the state, and whenever it's ready, they're going to bring it straight to council.
Well, I just had a question for the committee to see how you think we should proceed. There were 2 affiliated ordinances or items of discussion that go along with the land bank, and one was the vacant property, and one was the blight tax. And I wondered if the committee would support, since those two items play a role with the land bank, does the committee feel okay with those two items coming forward to the full committee as well at the same time as the interlocal? The full council, I'm sorry, yes. Just wanted your feedback on that.
Feedback on that.
I guess I'll try it and get rejected at council. Thank you.
Well, since it's on our list, do you want to make a motion and then it'll come forward as a motion?
Well, the only thing that's on there is the land bank. Do you see what I mean? So I didn't know. I mean, people could think it's people could think it's a separate issue, but it really needs to come forward together.
Mm-hmm. And Paul, do you have any update on the interlocal agreement?
Sure don't. But if you want the other two items to come forward, I would suggest that they be blue sheeted at the same time or in conjunction with the land bank.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You can push that forward with a motion at council. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, because a motion here would not be appropriate because
Right.
those two items are not in committee.
Right.
Thank you.
So, good point. They're all interrelated. Are there other issues on the list that you want to take action on? Okay. If we could look at our calendars and you all could throw out a few ideas for this committee needs to have a special meeting to hear the ZOTA on extended stay. It was moved into committee last week. And I believe it will be a full meeting. It won't be like a zone change, but it'll be a full vetting because attorneys have already been contacting me about it. So I think we need to look at probably at least an hour and a half for that. And then the 2040, the Blue Horse, and what did we just say we're going to put? The Parks Master Plan. Those issues could be in a special planning meeting. And today's the 17th. And Paul, do you know what time the Planning Commission ends on Thursdays? I know they end at a certain time so we can be here for a meeting. Okay. I was going to suggest the 26th before the council meeting for one of these. Nope.
Thursday, April 26th.
Well, March. I was going to suggest March, but...
Madam Chair, there is a council workshop on March the 26th at 5. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's on my calendar.
Okay. Let's look at April. Although I will say if we want to hear the Parks Master Plan before the budget, it would work to hear it before our budget work, which will take place after April 14th. So that's still a possibility. Could this committee meet for one of these issues on April the 9th before the council meeting? You do? Does it say? Oh.
Wow.
Now, I don't know that the Planning Commission will be finished by 4 o'clock or 4:30 on the 9th. We might start at 5 o'clock. Yes, on April the 9th. They meet on Thursdays, but not every one. How about,
Sometimes
they do. They do meet before council meetings. How about if we put that as a possibility? I'll need to check these out with all the schedulers. What, on April the 9th at 5 o'clock. And are there suggestions for one more meeting? We meet regularly on the 21st, but we're boxed in by water resources on the one end and work session on the other. So I would entertain any suggestions if you can throw out a date that at 10 o'clock on the 21st, and then come back into session at 1 o'clock. That's it. What do you think? I like it. Thinking outside the box. Get it all done in one day.
What?
10 on April the 21st at 10 a.m. and then again at 1 o'clock is our normal meeting. Oh. You won't be here.
That's all right. I mean,
is there any other suggestions so that we might have some choices? Yes, Vice Mayor.
have you got the agenda for what's on what day? Have we gotten to that yet or not?
No. If we meet on April the 9th, we can do either the zoning ordinance text amendment on the extended stay, or we could do the Blue Horse 2040 Parks Plan. And then we can vice versa.
Is that 4 items? Or
Blue Horse 2040 and Parks.
that's
3.
3 plus the other deal.
The zoning ordinance text
Zoning,
amendment,
right,
I
text
believe,
amendment.
will take its own meeting.
Okay.
I think it'll take its own meeting. That's why we're looking at 2 different times. So
21st is,
you want to do it at 9 o'clock on the 21st? Chuck, Councilmember Ellinger is suggesting 9 o'clock on the 21st.
Okay.
And then again at 1 o'clock on the 21st, and you're suggesting knock it all out that day? Try to get it all, but
I'm not here on the 21st. I can't. I want to be here for the Blue Horse. And so the 9th is,
Vice Mayor Gray can't be here the 21st at all in the
that's just
morning.
one I want to be here for. I'm out of town all that day.
Okay. Will you be here for 1 o'clock that day?
Nope.
No. What's your pleasure?
Let's do the horse and the park and the
2040.
2040.
On the 9th,
Maybe we
Vice Mayor?
and then, and then 21st.
Is already booked with our regular issues, remember?
But he was talking about the 10 a.m.
9.
Okay,
And we could do the
just knock them out.
Soda.
Zoda and the student.
Okay. Okay. All right, so I will put out an email to all the planning committee members that we're going to meet April 9th at 5 p.m. and April 21st.
Yeah.
The 9th at 5.
At 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. will be our regular meeting. And we may actually be able to clear this list of more things. Yeah. How's that sound? That's what's being suggested. It's twice on the 21st.
You're pushing it.
There is a council meeting on the 9th. So this planning committee meeting at 5 would precede the council meeting. It's a lot, I know.
Well, it's also Passover and Holy Thursday. In my opinion, we shouldn't even have a council meeting.
It's really up to you. I'm looking for your input because I really want to find a time when we all feel like we want to be here. On April the 9th, there is a 7 o'clock council meeting. So do you want to meet at 5 o'clock or not that day? You don't?
No, I do. I do want to meet. We don't generally observe religious.
Generally, we don't, but if there are certain people who won't be here because they personally do, and we don't have a quorum, that would be the... How many could be here on the 9th of April at 5 p.m.? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I think we have a quorum. Okay. So I'll put this forth to the Planning Committee, April 9th at 5 o'clock, April 21st at 9 a.m. Chuck? Yeah. And then we have our regular planning meeting at 1 o'clock that day. So we'll be overdosed on planning. Yes, but we may have a lot of these issues then complete. Thank you very much. Is there anything else? We have a motion to adjourn and a second.